Welcome back to another video. This is Mrs. Taranja with the Citizenship Academy. We are on Domain 1, Lesson 5, where we are going to talk about the theme in the first real sand giving day. So here's our objectives for this lesson. The first thing we're going to do is analyze and describe a theme in the text. And the second part is a free write paragraph about your own names and generate ideas for a more formal narrative. Some key vocabulary that we should note is 8-track tape, which is a music player that was popular in the 1960s and 1970s. Crescendo, a section of a song where the music becomes loud and intense. Sulking, behaving as if one is unhappy. Conga line, a popular Cuban dance. Discernible, recognizable. Jutting, extending outwards. España, Spanish word for the country of Spain. Visas, documents sometimes required for travel between countries, and esperanza, Spanish word for hope. So, we're going to do a quick review of what theme is. Theme is a literary term that describes an important idea that runs through a text, or a central idea in a text. So if we're talking about the central theme in the first real sand giving day, we would notice that the conflict Blanco feels between wanting to be a true American by celebrating a traditional Thanksgiving and the strong Cuban culture of his family. That is the overall theme of this whole story, is that conflict. He wants to have that American, tradition, but at the same time he's fighting with his Cuban culture. If you notice from the last video, we had he had a lot of issues with that, where family was bringing in Cuban foods, even though he wanted it to be mainly the American foods. So that is just a overarching theme of this whole text. So this is an example of where we would find theme within this text. November came around and my teacher, Mrs. Echeverria, handed out some ditto sheets to color for Thanksgiving. The pilgrims' tall hats I colored black, the buckles on their shoes gold, the cornucopias of squash and pumpkins all kinds of orange and yellows, the huge turkey in amber brown, a turkey, not a pork roast like my family always had for Thanksgiving. As we colored, Mrs. Echeverria narrated the story of the first Thanksgiving, enthusiastically acting it out as if she had been there. Then the chief of the Indians told Pilgrim John, "We make big feast for you," and Pilgrim John said, "Yes, let's give thanks to our new friends, and for this land where we are free." My teacher seemed to understand Thanksgiving like a true American, even though she was Cuban also. Maybe, I thought, if I convince Abuela to have a real Thanksgiving, she and the whole family will finally understand too. So if we're looking in this text, there's a lot of examples of that conflict that he's fighting. He mentions how he was very adamant of making the turkey an amber brown, which was a different color than the pork that he typically had. The fact that, they had this beautiful feast and he really wanted to understand that American tradition, and how he was trying to convince his abuela that maybe, if we do this, maybe people will understand too. So this is an example of how that conflict within Blanco is the overarching theme. So we're going to read an excerpt from the first real sand giving day, and we will talk about it after. After dessert, Abuelo made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee. He turned on the stereo system and put in Hoy Como Ayer, his favorite 8-track tape, with 8 billion songs from their days in Cuba. The crescendo began, and Minervino took his butter knife and tapped out a matching beat on his soda can. Before you could say Happy Thanksgiving, there was a conga line 20 Cubans long, circling the domino players around the Florida sunroom. When the conga finished, the line broke up into couples dancing while I sat sulking on the sofa. You can't teach old Cubans new tricks, I thought, watching the shuffle of their feet. There seemed to be no order to their steps, no discernible pattern to the chaos of their swaying hips and jutting shoulders, and yet there was something absolutely perfect and complete, even beautiful, about them dancing as easily as they could talk, walk, and breathe. As I began picking up the rhythm, Abuela dashed into the room, twirling a dishcloth above her head and demanding, "Silencio! Silencio! Por favor!" Papa turned down the music and the crowd froze, waiting for her next words. Tio Rigoberto just called. He said he heard from Romancito that my sister Eliana got out, with the whole familia, she announced, her voice cracking as she wiped her eyes with the dishcloth and continued. They're in Espana waiting to get las visas. In a month más o menos they'll be here. Que emoción. She didn't need to explain much more. It was a journey they all knew. They had all taken just a few years before. A journey I didn't know, having arrived in America when I was only 45 days old. But over the years I've heard the stories they have always told in low voices and with teary eyes, reliving the plane lifting from the streets, the palm trees, the rooftops of their homes, and country they might never see again, flying to some part of the world they'd never seen before. One suitcase packed mostly with photographs and keepsakes. No more than a few dollars in their pocket, and a whole lot of esperanza. That's what the Pilgrims must have felt like, more or less, I imagined. They had left England to search for a new life, too, full of hope and courage, a scary journey ahead of them. Maybe my family didn't know about the turkey or yams or pumpkin pie, but they were a lot more like pilgrims than I had realized. The next morning, Abuela had made toaster treats and café con leche, but didn't eat, complaining she had stomach cramps all night. She said Abuela was still in bed nauseated. Mama admitted she threw up before going to sleep. I thought it was strange that it was that strange stuffing in a box. I had diarrhea, I confessed, as did Papa. Caco claimed he was fine. None of us knew what to make of our upset stomachs until Tia Esmeralda called. She told Abuela she'd been throwing up all night and was only then beginning to feel like herself again. She blamed it on those strange llames. Then Tio Regino called and said had to take a dose of his mother's elixir paregorico, which cured anything and everything. He blamed it on the flan, thinking he remembered it tasting a little sour. The phone rang all day long with relatives complaining about their ailments and offering explanations. Some, like Tia Mirta, blamed the cranberry jelly. Others blamed the black beans or the yuca that was too garlicky. And some, like me, dared to blame it on the pork. But surprisingly, no one, not even Abuela, blamed the turkey. So in this one, we can see how the theme is still present, but it's shifted a little bit. His conflict is, trying to want it to be more American, with the Cuban culture, and realizing that all of them are really connected. So it's kind of showing that theme transitioning a little bit. So for the next part, this is going to be your assignment or assessment that you're going to complete after this video. So it's going to be a free write. So in the next lesson, you're going to begin writing and reading a personal narrative about names. In order to get you thinking about names and what they mean to us, we're going to engage in a brainstorming activity called free writing. When free writing, don't worry about spelling or grammar and punctuation. The important thing is just to warm up your brain and get down some ideas that will help with the more formal writing later on. Just think about the topic and write down whatever comes to your mind. You may write about your first, middle, or last name, or some combination of the three. So basically, you're just going to be spewing ideas on paper of things to do with your name. And on the next page, I have an example provided by the text, and I can actually give an example of that as well. So for this one, my name is short and sweet, Mark. It's just 4 letters and 1 syllable. 2 of my best friends when I were a kid were Zachary and Deborah. And I used to wish I had more poetic sounding names like that they did. But I came to appreciate my name. It rhymes with a lot of words like shark, park, dark, quark. So it's easy for me to write little poems or limericks about myself. I also have a Hebrew name, Moshe, Hebrew for Moses. When I watch the 10 Commandments or the Prince of Egypt, I feel proud that I was named after a heroic biblical figure. I also think I was given an M name after a great-great-uncle I never met, Mayer. I've been meaning to ask family about him, but haven't really gotten around to it. So notice how it kind of jumps around a lot with different pieces of it, but it's still very powerful because it's still referring to his name. So in my own personal narrative, I would talk about how I got my name. So my first name is actually Holly, and when my mother was pregnant, her and my dad were like, we're going to name her Emma May after her great-great-grandmother. Well, eventually my dad decided to watch a TV show that was called The Price is Right, and he decided that one was a better name. So him and my mom had a big fight about it, and they ended up coming with Holly Mae. So my middle name is just as special because it is still my great grandmother's name, and it's a fun story for me to tell people about how I got my first name. So notice how that's kind of my free write. It was just like the story of how I got my name. It could be, the fact that, I wasn't born around Christmas time, but a lot of people think I was because it's a traditional Christmas name. So it's really cool. This is a really fun activity, and it gets you really thinking about how you got your name, what's special about your name, what's unique. Did you have anybody around you that had something similar? But notice with your free write, it's just going to be a lot of bouncing around. Again, you don't have to worry about spelling. Don't worry about grammar. No punctuation. It just write and get your brain starting to think of ideas. I like to think of it as just letting my brain just spew out things and write it down. You're going to complete that in some sort of way. You can write it down. You can use any format provided, and be sure to send it to your teacher. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.